Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the second method of previewing your renders with Mental Ray in exercise 7. The second method is to use the Render Preview tool. The Render Preview tool is pretty straightforward and very easy to use. To use the Render Preview tool, in the Render Main toolbar over here, we'll go under the Render menu. You'll notice that there's this button that says Preview. It's very easy to use. Watch this. All you do is click once, and there you go. XSI creates a Render Preview window right on top of your viewport that you can actually drag and move around. It's its own window, and it'll show you a preview render of the scene. Now, the renderer options that it's using here by default are the render options that are placed for the pass, not for the render region. So this is actually using different Mental Ray quality settings than the render region tool was earlier. So just keep that in mind. Over here, let's look at some of these options. If we click on this options button, right here we can see we can switch the different options that we're using. Right now we're set up to use the current pass render options, which is what I just talked about 20 or 30 seconds ago. The render options that Render Preview is using at the moment is the pass render options. In other words, it's using the Mental Ray options that have been defined at the pass level. Down here we can use viewport A, B, C, and D. This is because the render region tool can be used in different viewports. For example, I'll close this. I'll hit F12 to go ahead and switch to my 4 viewport configuration. What I can do is create a render region in each one of these windows. And you notice that each window is defined by a letter. This top window is viewport A. This one over here is viewport B, C, and D down here. Each one of these render regions resides inside one of their respective viewports. So this top left one up here is render region tool A. This one's render region tool B, C, and D down here in the lower right. Each perspective view viewport here, A, B, C, or D, can only have one render region. So you can't make multiple render regions in the same viewport. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and close all of those, and I'm going to hit F12 to maximize the camera viewport over here, or viewport B. Alright. So if I go back and create that render preview again, I go back to the options. Now hopefully this makes more sense to you. If I switch over to viewport A region options, it's going to use viewport A to render this out. Viewport B will render out here. Viewport C will render out as so on and so forth. I think you get the idea. Then we have this button here to AutoFit Viewer. If we turn that off and we increase the size of this, let's refresh by hitting this refresh button up there. You get a render down here. If we go ahead and switch AutoFit Viewer, you notice the entire window scales down to be able to fit around the render preview here that we have defined in the window, which is right now 400 pixels by 270 pixels, width times height. If we go over here, we have the refresh button, which allows us to manually refresh this. However, by default, this is set to auto refresh. So if I move my camera around, you notice that the render preview window is constantly refreshing. If I grab an object and move it, for example, it's constantly refreshing. Same thing if I change the color of a shader, or so on and so forth. You notice there's this lock button here right next to the refresh button. If I click on that, it locks down this window. What that means is that the window will not automatically refresh. So essentially I turn the window into manual mode, so to speak. So if I grab an object and I go to its shader and I change the color of the shader, you notice the render preview window is not updating automatically. So it can behave just like the render region tool, where it updates automatically, or you can update it manually. And this button here lets you toggle that behavior on or off. See, as soon as I take that off, the behavior switches to automatic. So every time I make a change to the scene, it automatically refreshes. That's something that you may want to happen, and in some cases that's something that you may not want to happen. Then of course we have this save picture button, which allows us to go ahead and save the render, just like with the render region tool. We can save anywhere on our hard drive. So you can send that out to your boss or your supervisor or whoever you need to send that out to get a preview render approved or whatnot. Okay. One other thing that we can do is we can create multiple render preview windows. And the way we can do that is pretty simple. If we go over here to View, and we go down to Rendering, and we go down here, we can see we have Render Preview. Now you'll see it says Shift plus Q. That's not the default shortcut. That's my shortcut that I created to be able to do render previews faster. So you can set that up if you want to, or you can leave it at the default, which is no shortcut. So I'll go ahead and click on render preview. You notice now we have two render previews. Access size flexible, and it lets you do that. We can have more than one render preview open at a time. One thing that I can do is I can lock down this render preview, and I can lock down this render preview. And what I could do is I could change the color of the shader, for example. Close that. I can refresh the second one, so now I can compare and contrast the two renders. I can say, the green looks pretty good, but this brownish color looks pretty nice too. But you know what? I'll stick with the green. And then you can close that and close that if you want to. So it's a pretty neat little previewing tool. Works just as great as the render region tool, just a little bit different. So you have those two options for you if you want to render with the render preview or if you want to render with the render region tool. Both allow you to preview and test out different things in your scene to see how stuff's rendering out with mental ray and get you working along on your production. Okay, so that's going to do it for the render preview tool. Pretty easy to use, right? Very simple, very basic. We're just going to go ahead and end this video here and get moving here with mental ray because we have a lot of topics to cover. So I'll see you in the next video.